FID, first input delay, how to fix Google Search Console FID errors. In this video session, we're going to explore different ways for us to fix FID errors. Part of Core Web Vitals, which is also part of Page Experience Update, for us to have 100% good URLs, we have to fix Core Web Vital errors. First input delay basically means this. Almost all websites will have functionality provided to its users. It could be a link on a site, it could be a menu, it could be a search button, contact form button. Any interaction a user can have on a web page, first input delay measures the time a user clicks or interacts with a web page to the time the web page is able to respond to that interaction. Remember, it's not necessarily the completion of interaction. It's not necessarily the time for the completion of their interaction. Let's imagine I press a send button. It takes 3 seconds for that web form to send. That's not FID. First input delay is someone clicks the send button and they get a response. It could be a placeholder or busy icon. Make sense? Now, knowing that, I'll give you some samples before we move on. Let's imagine a mobile menu, right? I'll click on it. It has opened. I know it's really fast in this example, but first input delay measures the time of the response only, okay? It's very important to understand that. Let's take a look at this because it'll make sense now. Let's imagine someone presses on this contact form send button. I want you to pay attention to this. There's an empty space here, but as soon as I press on it, there's going to be a circle icon here. That's the first input delay, as in the browser has responded with something. That's the first input delay, not this. Now, knowing that, PageSpeed Insights is a great tool. We know that. But when it comes to first input delay, if we press on the link, it takes us to the explanation of what FID stands for and so on, and what we can do. Surely it's great to read through it and so on. But since you've invested in this private course by Renkia, my job is to do my best to simplify what is otherwise complex. And in fact, all Core Web Vital errors are complex for most people. So let's move on and let's see what we can do if we end up having bad FID score in Google Search Console. Now, remember, as I've said to you in the previous video sessions, overall optimization of your website is definitely going to help everything to do with Core Web Vitals, including the first input delay. Faster the website, as in faster the website, faster the web page, equals better Core Web Vital scores all around. That's why PageSpeed Insights initially shows us all the improvement points when we analyze a URL here. So in this scenario, this web page is extremely complex. And in fact, it's one of the most complex examples that I could pass on to you, because then fixing less complex issues will be obviously easier. So now, if I look at the website and the URL, surely if all these things are contributing to slow page load times, it's naturally going to contribute to first input delay as well. But unlike largest contentful pane or cumulative layout shift, there is no FID here. It has FCP, TBT, all this confusing techno jargon. First contentful pane, think of it similar to largest contentful pane. So instead of that score being the largest, it's saying whatever is the first painted on the page. TBT then is total blocking time. What does that mean? That means, let's imagine someone presses here. As you can see, something happened. If I interact with this element, something happens. If I press on that link, something else happens. Right? If I press on the drop-down menu here, something happened. So I'm interacting with the page. If I press this, something happens. If I press increase quantity, add to cart, anything that I can interact with, including menu links here, including search, anything that I can interact with, it's measured. Because if it's slow, then obviously it's no good. That means when someone fills out the details for this sample web form and presses send, there is a lot of things occurring behind the scenes for that interaction to begin processing. That means if this web page here, this sample web page, if it removed everything else but this here, let's actually do something like this. To demonstrate the point, let me actually do something like this, because it'll then make sense. It'll be much easier for you to then learn this. Okay, that's the header portion. It's got some menus. It's a complex menu structure. That's no problems. But let's actually do something like this. As you can see, that's the entire web page with so many things behind the scenes to display what people see. That means if I scroll all the way down to here, that's the end of the body element. So let me do something like this. Let's imagine this scenario. Let's imagine this was the web page. Let's imagine that's the case. And now if I interact with these elements, it's very basic. Everything I removed 90% of the page here. That means when I interact with any element here, it'll be faster. Because the way the browsers render web pages requires that some scripts or some coding needs to fire, as in needs to execute, needs to process before even that interaction occurs. Okay? Now, knowing that, we can say, okay, you know what? How in the world do we then improve first input delay score? What you need to do is look at the web page and simply, from the front end, ask yourself, okay, what can someone do on a web page? Because Rank Your Website, as you can see, it's straightforward. It's simple website. But most websites won't be simple. So then you have to say, okay, what can people interact with? Menu structure, obviously, that's common sense. Add to cart button for e-commerce, that's common sense. So you analyze those type of interaction. Then you say, okay, how about individual product URLs? What can someone do here? What can they press on? They press on this, something happens. They can increase quantity. Something happens, something changes. What happens at the cart? As you can see, something happened. Then we can, something else happen here. Now, the less complex the web page, better it is for first input delay. Okay, so knowing that, let's go and see what else we can do. What tests we can run, because that's the first step. When you analyze Core Web Vital issues, I suggested to you to use incognito option, because then you will see better results. If I press on F12 on the keyboard, bring out Lighthouse report, I can do that. I can run a test here. I can select performance. Let's generate a report using Lighthouse. While that's occurring, let me go and request that URL in a new tab, press on F12, and let's select performance. Now, Lighthouse has generated the report here. Time to interactive, that's an important score for us to improve first input delay. Because what that says is, you know what? For someone visiting this web page, the time that it takes for that interaction to be smooth, it's taking very long time. I can toggle between the list elements here. I can learn more about what in the world time to interactive is all about and how we can improve it. Here we also have total blocking time. As we can see, that's 330 milliseconds. And the Core Web Vitals in Google Search Console tells us that anything past 100 milliseconds for first input delay is definitely no-no. So now I can analyze all these opportunities. We already know most of them. I can press on first FCP TBT. This is same as page speed insights. Next, let's take a look at performance here. Now I'm going to show you some tips for us to conduct different type of analysis, particularly for identifying and fixing first input delay. And that is, we can select the CPU. Let's put it 6 times slow down. And here in the previous video sessions, I've shown you how to simply refresh, as in reload the web page, to profile web page load itself. But there is also a record button here. Now, there is a difference between these two. If I reload the page, I can see first contentful paint, I can see largest contentful paint, I can see many other things according to entire web page load. Think it like that. Performance of the web page load itself. Because as you can see, it's loading its profile and I don't have to press stop because I've just reloaded the page itself. Now, what I'm going to do is do the same thing, perhaps not the same thing, but similar. CPU, I'll throttle it down, as in slow it down to 6 times, and it's much more slower. So basically, Web Developer Toolbar, Performance Report, we can tweak it. We can even change the network settings, as to say, slow 3G. Let's imagine someone is on slow network connecting to our web page website. So I can then do that if I want, okay? In this example, I set no throttling. Also, you can actually add custom settings here. Depending on where you're located, internet speeds may be different. Let's imagine you are located in UK. If that's the case, you can find UK internet speed stats. And then take things from there if you're only serving UK, for example. Also, Google Search Console, search results, performance tab will show you device, which devices people use the most. And then you can say, okay, you know what? That's great. You can optimize your website accordingly. But if a website is having bad first input delay errors, then we already know there is something that we need to fix anyway, right? So I'm showing you different tips and insights that you may be able to utilize for your own analysis, okay? Now, in this scenario, I'm going to select the record button instead. Now, the difference between the record and reload is that when we record the page performance, it records the runtime, not necessarily the entire web page load itself, if that makes sense. It can be confusing, I understand that, if you've never used Web Developer Toolbar. I'm trying to simplify, which I believe is complex for most web developers as well, okay? So now let's record the page itself. And while that's occurring, let me start interacting with the page. I tend to do this because I want to see, what's really going on with that performance of this website. If I press this, what happens? Interaction happen. Okay, so now it's profiling. And let me press stop. So how long should you run a profiling for? It's totally up to you. It will depend on the web page you're analyzing. Now, as you can see, when we've recorded the runtime performance, we end up seeing something similar to the page load itself. Okay, so these two processes are a little bit different. Keep that in mind. So now I know where I can find my largest contentful paint, right? We've got Web Vitals. We can zoom in, zoom out. We can hover around. We can find the timing of it. That's my largest contentful paint. In this example, it's heading 1. And we know how to divide the web page load into 2 sections to fix LCP issues. Now, similarly, we also have first input delay. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Is there first input delay? Did it record that? If it didn't, then you may need to reload the page itself. Okay, we've got timing. We're looking at experience. That's largest contentful paint, and that's my first contentful paint. Obviously, if it's going to record the largest contentful paint, it's going to record the first contentful paint. What's the difference between these two? It's important for us to understand that. The difference is, the first one is whatever the first one is, and whatever the first web page element the browser has calculated and painted for the person to see. Whereby largest contentful paint then is whatever it considers as largest area for it to calculate. Now, for us to be able to fix first input delay issues, what we need to do is look at how long it takes for that first contentful paint area to calculate, and then we need to look at the main tab here. The main tab we can minimize or extend. The main tab shows us basically everything that we want to see according to that main calculation, so to speak. It shows us what tasks, at what point, what tasks took longer at what point. When you want to analyze the performance report, your eyes should be focused at first input delay, then anything that has this red little icon, triangle icon at the end. Because when you look at that, this task here, it took too long. It warns us, saying, you know what, we've calculated all this. This particular task is taking too long. This particular task is taking too long. And let's look. This task is taking too long, and so on and so forth. And then it says to us, okay, for this particular example, it has parsed an HTML elements. It has evaluated certain scripts. There was a royal slider function and all that stuff. Now, do you need to learn all that stuff to fix first input delay? Not necessarily. Well, although it would be helpful, what I'm trying to say is, looking at this, you can see here. You can see the reports under summary. You can see the system took 1 millisecond, 59 millisecond for all the child processes to occur. Loading 7 millisecond. Scripting took 101 millisecond at that point. And the first point, you can see that's first point before the first contentful pane. That means this website requires absolute optimization using all the techniques that you've already learned thus far. Or else, first input delay issues will always occur, because even the first main task is taking 215 milliseconds when we only need 100 milliseconds. Okay? Now, then in total for this task, 216 milliseconds. So then you can continue analyzing, looking at first contentful pane, at what point in time frame. That's the time stamp. And then say, okay, what came after that? What tasks with problems particularly? And say, okay, that took too long. Press on it. It gives you guidelines as to how to go about fixing that. But you can also look at bottom up, select by activity, select by category, and so on, including select by frame. Then let's select group by URL. And let's move on. Let's look at event log. Here it's telling us about this particular process. So now I can say, okay, how about this one? How about this task? How about this? As you can see, the activity for this, it's jQuery, JavaScript. How about this? How about this? It's the same URL, that's okay. How about this? So I'm not going to explain all that, but rather tell you this is the analysis that you need to do. Just log in. We want to know what is taking too long. At what point? So now if I say, okay, how about, you can identify the element itself. And say, okay, what is that element? That's an input element. Okay, so then you can go back and say, okay, here, it's evaluating some scripts at this point. Right? So we can look at that and say, okay, here it has evaluated the script as well. Did it evaluate something before? Yes, it did. What was that script? How about this here? How about this here? So this is what you need to do for any website. Because now you're kind of getting an understanding as to what is really causing that first input delay. Now, at this moment, I've shown you complex methods to analyze first input delay. In the next video session, I'm going to show you how we can fix it, how we can improve that first input delay. I thank you very much for learning with Renkia, and I'll talk with you in the next video session.